Hi, everyone. Welcome to Decode and welcome to our session today. I'm honored to moderate this incredible panel. And before we dive into our topic, let's just go around the room and meet our panelists. James, let's start with you.
Thank you, Kristen. I'm James Bavington, the CTO at StrategiQ. We're a UK-based agency. We work primarily with WordPress, but also offer a variety of marketing services as well.
Great. Let's go to Tim next.
Hi, my name's Tim Nash. I'm a WordPress security consultant at Tempered Limited.
And last but not least, Scott.
Yeah, hey everyone, I'm Scott Jones. I'm the CEO at Illustrate Digital. So we are a WordPress specialist agency based in the UK. And we also do user research, UX design, and a bunch of other things surrounding the WordPress specific topic.
Wonderful. Thank you all for joining today. Our topic today carries forward an incredible panel that we had last year focused on security, but layers in the perspective of performance. So we all know that securing a site or platform or team is essential, but we want to do so while enhancing performance, not impeding it. So to start us off, get us going, I'd love to hear from each of you on this notion of balancing security and performance. My first question is, what are some of the hardest things that you have to deal with when rolling out security so as not to hurt your site or team's performance? James, let's start with you again.
Yeah, of course. Security and performance aren't necessarily brand new concepts within our agency, but they've certainly both grown in, I think, their importance, their relevance, and I guess the importance that our clients place on them when they're briefing us or we're tending for projects. I think for me, some of the barriers, particularly with security, is, the real shame is that the tools and features don't need to be there if people weren't trying to breach or attack the site. So often the biggest issue for us is they can kind of get in the way of the fantastic CMS that WordPress is as a content editor. So, for us, allowing some of our clients to understand why we put those tools and features in place, particular plugins, why we recommend setting up 2FA, as frustrating as it can be for some users to dig out their phone to get the password. It's just helping them through that process, understanding the value of implementing great security, prevention rather than cure. And once they get over that sort of overhead of understanding that these are all necessary steps, and not accidentally locking themselves out of the platform if they enter their password incorrectly a few times with WordPress, for example, they're the main issues that we have. But often with, good introduction, particularly when we pitch, they understand the true value of those measures that are there in the first place. I don't know about Scott or Tim if they've come across similar challenges.
I could certainly build on that. Yeah, I think that really my perspective is user experience and security have a lot more in common than we often think. And for me, it's about expectation setting. And as you've just said, James, having those conversations, whether it be within a pitch or an initial proposal conversation with a client, or actually getting into the mix of things, or actually when end users are interacting with a digital tool or a piece of technology, really it's about explaining that in the best way possible, setting expectations and being, communicating why, for example, 2FA, like you just mentioned, why are we using 2FA? Why are we going through this extra point of potential frustration? And actually that helps people get on board with the security processes, the protocols, and the reasons why. And I think a similar perspective internally with our own team, if we communicate the reason why and we communicate that with clients, then we tend to be more on board with that and therefore tend to be more secure and delivering it better.
Tim, anything to add from your perspective?
Sort of bringing it back to the performance side, I think there's a historical thing that WordPress used to be, the way you solve security was install a plugin, and then this plugin would slow down your site. So what do? Uninstall the plugin, your site gets hacked. So really, it's about beating that message, and that security doesn't actually mean install a plugin. And security done well shouldn't have a performance impact. Security done well should be enhanced by UX design, shouldn't be You shouldn't, your site owners shouldn't be hitting barriers and going, I can't do this, I'm going to disable them. And that's the biggest challenge, is convincing them that, you've got to take these things seriously. But we have to, as an industry, work with our customers to make sure that they are not being put into these places where they have these constant barriers and feelings. And 2FA is a really good example, because there's lots of work being done on making 2FA seamless.
I think that's a great point. Treating security as not just a binary issue, but something that has context and nuance, and that it's important to educate folks on. That's great. So as we look at 2024, I'm curious to hear again from each of you, what are some things that you are trying or doing differently this year from that security and performance balance perspective?
I'm happy to come in first on that, Kristen, and I'll build on what I said earlier. The overall scope of what we're doing hasn't really changed. It's just, I'd say it's certainly more front and center in that client education element that Scott and Tim were building on. And it's a key part to us to ensure that box is ticked, if you like, because, some of the companies we work with small and sort of big brands globally. There are different requirements, different expectations. So what we're doing differently, what we're seeing is, if we tackle the conversation around both security and performance early on, that puts us in good stead if we're tendering for a project, tendering for an RFP, but also making the security, having that awareness internally. We as an agency are doing a lot more, not just around data protection and security, but the security of our clients' websites. And we're asking questions very early on as well, to ensure that the client is also doing their part on their side. And we find that we're getting very, very good engagement from that. And to give you an example of what I mean, there's only so far the work that we can do. If you guys client side have a member of the team leave who has an editor role or an admin role, it's on that mutual partnership to ensure that the security is maintained. And and similarly, if for example our client wants to have a really robust security and testing process from go live and beyond, working together on that sort of upgrade cycle of plugins and the core platform, and ensuring that everything is maintained well. That being more of a mutual aspect of the way we work now, rather than just being stuff that we do in the background to ensure that there isn't a problem, and that kind of preventive measure. So that active conversation is something that I've noticed change, particularly in the last year, and something that we're very proactively doing.
Scott, I saw you nodding your head there a bit. It sounds like you've got something to add on.
Yeah, I would say that I think I'm reflecting on, we're a decade in business, and reflecting on the journey we've come on from where I started being frustrated as a client, and then founded an agency on the back of it. And certainly some of those frustrations are around how restricted you can sometimes feel as a client and as a marketer when you're you're working with an agency, or you have a particular website. And actually, it's the balance of this positive restrictiveness is really important, exactly as James was just saying, and how you communicate that. And I don't want my clients or our clients to feel restricted, but there are times when we need to restrict them for positive reasons. I think as long as that's being communicated, we want them to have the freedom to edit content. We want them to have the freedom to develop if they're developing, but we also want to make sure we're locking down the right things for the right reasons, and explaining that well, and doing really good stakeholder management on those pieces. I think moving into the future, I think something that would be wrong for me not to mention, of course, would be AI, and thinking about how we consider privacy as well as security with AI. And we've got to be conscious about where our data, our intellectual property is being sent, how it's being used. And I think that's an education piece as much as it is an exploratory conversation. But as a service business especially, we've got to think about how our client data is actually being used. So if we're talking about things like automated testing tools to improve security, we have to try and get a good blended approach of that with where is the data going in those automated testing tools, if anywhere, and also blending that with AI is not perfect yet. So how does human interaction come into that? Because AI should be there to assist and improve, not take over necessarily. And so that contextual knowledge from us, I think, is something that we're certainly trying to press into in 2024. How do we blend that contextual knowledge of our team and our experts with the opportunity to use, you know, AI and machine learning tools to assist and make things more efficient and easier as well?
You mentioned, Scott, if I can just come in on a point you raised around limiting the access that your clients might have. Do you often find that giving all clients admin CMS level access, for example, can be a bad thing? Do you try and make sure that just the right level of access is given to what's needed?
The truth is they don't always need it, right? Like you've usually got a head of marketing, a marketing manager, a head of content, whatever their role may be, that is the key person, or, you know, it might be a head of marketing and a head of IT, and they're the key people that need the admin role. Everyone else doesn't necessarily need that. But yeah, like we don't need many admin roles from a traditional WordPress sense. It's more us that would hold that rather than the client. But again, that's like a communication piece, right? Like, how do you help them feel like they're in control whilst making sure the right restrictions are in place?
Well, there will be people who don't realize that WordPress does have this really quite flexible system. And you can, you know, when your boss comes in and says, why am I not an administrator? 2 minutes later, they could be the super duper administrator with the super duper administrator role that has exactly the same capabilities they had 20 minutes earlier. One of the very first things I do when I come into an organization is we go through the WordPress roles and go, okay, do you need 12 administrators, 2 of which aren't here anymore, 4 of which are contractors? And who is this person? You don't know. Oh, okay, let's get rid of all of them. And genuinely, the first step that I normally take is to down the permission level, the roles down for every single person, and go, wait to see who complains. Give them a week. No one complains? Give it another week. Once someone comes along and says, I need to do this, you can then go, okay, well, now we know what privileges you might need. But you should be giving the privileges for the roles that people are doing, not the roles that people want. And the boss doesn't need a role. The boss probably shouldn't even be have access to the website, if we're honest. Why? What are they doing on it? Shouldn't they be doing something more important, like skiing or something? I think
it's a more widespread problem, Tim, than you kind of make out, because the amount of sites that we take over, often we'll be building a new project, we'll get early access to the existing incumbent site to have a look, export data, and it always horrifies me how many dormant former members of staff have got not just access, but admin level access. And often I think one of the biggest security vulnerabilities, and hopefully you'll correct me if there are others, that I think can be an easy fix, is just reviewing the user roles, the permissions, and chopping those down. And as you say, the semantics of a label of a role with the flexible system is a really good way of getting around that. We're incredibly restrictive within the agency as to how we give our colleagues access. You know, if we're working and helping support write content, they do not need an admin role to do that.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right with what you said before, Tim, that the conversation starts with what do you need and why do you need it? And then, you know, setting the expectation from there of what access you should have. And yeah, I guess like for us, even with some of our clients, even when they've got in-house developers, we're the last point of, I guess, permission before they launch something, so that, you know, they know we're the experts, they know we're on top of things from a security perspective. So we're the ones actually making that approval to keep them in check. And it's a really good relationship to have. Sometimes it's that way around, sometimes it's the other way around. But yeah, regardless, there should always be minimal and ideally as close to none as possible admin level privileges.
These are all great points. I'd love to take us a little bit deeper. So we have a lot of agencies and developers in our audience today, and I'd love to see if we can give them some best practices. So James, I know that you have a passion for performance. I'd love to hear from you. What are some of the best performance practices that you think of when building a site or a platform?
Yeah, of course, and I'll try and be succinct because it continues to be an on-point topic. The passion I have has always really been driven out of that desire to see how fast you can make a site, how high you can score on the tools, but moreover, client expectations now. We're seeing RFPs where we're being asked in discovery kickoffs, oh, we're going to get 100% core web vitals, right? Even though we want all of these videos, interactions, and things that would make it near impossible. And again, coming back to expectation management, right from the outset, what we do as a team, it's making sure right from the very early stages we understand, well, what is the website application that we're designing, that we're building? What does a successful conversion look like? What does the user experience need to be? Because from our perspective, as an integrated agency, we've got people challenging from a speed performance perspective, SEO, data analytics, what do we track? Everybody's fighting for attention within a project. So from our perspective, we have to keep things as clean, simple, and as basic as possible. Just to give you a sort of couple of examples, we have rules that, you almost have to have a really good case to have any plugin installed. Now, whilst we find it possible to launch sites without any plugins today, every plugin has to be there because it's the absolute best in class way of doing something. For example, if you're looking at SEO, why not use the Yoast SEO plugin rather than trying to build some of those features yourself if there's a great one already there. We try and bake functionality into the theme rather than just picking plugins off the shelf. But from our perspective as well, we have a very stripped back base theme that performs out of the box faster than the theme that comes built into WordPress. It's a theme that the team update continually. Every line of code has to serve a purpose. It's based on quite a long-standing base theme called underscores. We have our own sort of version of that. And for us, we build from there and we test the performance as we go. So as we add in key performance attributes like lazy loading, we monitor core web vitals, we monitor performance as we're building it. So that if we actually set an objective for a project, if we set an expectation with a client, rather than testing everything when we're getting close to the end and trying to work out how we optimize it, we can see the performance throughout the process if anything bulky drops in. And then that also helps us make decisions and communicate with the client how we're getting on with low speed, with performance, and how everything ties in. But yeah, it's a really important topic to us, and it's something that we make sure as a team that we're factoring into every project from the outset, even if it's something that the client hasn't asked for.
Yeah, and I could probably build on that to say we take a very similar approach to what James has just mentioned, with having a foundational framework that we improve and we roll out continually. And I think when it comes to that client conversation of there are a different number of stakeholders who all have different priorities and different things they need, compromise can be a bit of a dirty word, but it's an important word in our space, and it's a word that we put forward to clients quite a bit, and we say at the start of a project, there will be compromise here because different stakeholders will need different things. We'll advise different things, and we need to understand what are we going to compromise on. Exactly as James said, if you want a video hosted on the homepage, it's going to slow it down. So, is your compromise that you want the video or that you want better performance? James, you mentioned Core Web Vitals there as well. The Google PageSpeed Insights tool is something that I think probably most developers or most marketers would sort of point back to as an industry standard to some degree there, given that rankings are quite important to marketers particularly. I think it's important to mention, as a tool for the audience that we're talking to on this panel, that Google treats this progressively. And so the need to continually roll out and tweak and improve performance alongside security is really, really key, because your score is always a percentage of how well other sites are performing. And so, over time, you should expect to drop in these rankings and results. So actually keeping on top of that, it might be that your site isn't any slower than it was 2 months ago, but that actually you're a percentage of how sites are now performing. So really keeping on top of it and keeping an eye on that, is really, really key, and something that as an agency we like to make sure that things are routinely optimized and kept on top of.
I'm very lucky in that, unlike you two, I don't have to sell performance and marketing and sell website design. So I get to look at it as an actual, just what it really is and what performance is really about. And one thing that obviously it's hard for you to be able to tell your clients, that core vitals doesn't mean anything. Ultimately, if the site is, you can get 100% and your site will be dog slow, because you can hit all the metrics you like and that site will be poorly performing. But humans, we love to gamify things, whether it's performance, whether it's security, whether it's going to the shops and working out if you can get your shopping to the exact penny. All of these sort of things, we love scores and we love metrics. Sometimes it might be worth reminding ourselves as an industry, not necessarily how we sell it, but as an industry itself, that when we're talking internally, that these things are just a number, and that its performance should be about making things go faster or more, allowing more concurrency. And I think James hit on something that's going to repeat throughout this conversation, that actually keeping things simple, reducing that from a performance perspective, hundreds of plugins, nightmare scenario. But is it? Hundreds of really well-written, tiny, specific use plugins by a really good team that have been designed so they fit together could make for an amazing site. 100 plugins downloaded off WordPress.org and all installed and then just left, probably a mess and will massively affect your performance, but equally affect your security. But one of those plugins might be a random plugin that just changes some scores somewhere, and you'll go, oh, look, I've got 100% everything. My site falls over and it gets a 502 on every other load, but on that important load, when I put it into the scoring system, it got 100%. So I'm feeling good about myself.
Wonderful. I like this. I like this definition of performance as dynamic, something we should revisit, and something that may require compromise. Tim, you mentioned selling. Let's talk about that a little bit more. As a security consultant, I'm curious to hear how at times you might need to sell security investment or features. And part of that does come back to performance, right? There can be performance benefits through investing in security. So I'm curious if you have any examples or stories in this vein that you can share with us.
It is really hard to sell security without it sounding like a protection racket. You know, hi, if you don't do this, your house might burn down. Oh, this is just a lighter I'm using. So one of the things that I do sell security on is performance. And the way I do that is by saying that actually security goes hand in hand with performance and with accessibility. And people are like, but they all have these common thread that if we keep things simple and simplify everything, we should get better performance, we should get better accessibility, and we should get better security. Again, if when in security, we refer to lots of plugins as having a larger attack surface, which just means that, you know, there's more things to go after. So if we can reduce down that attack surface, we can reduce down the amount of stuff we're doing and stuff we're using on a website, then it's going to be better for the security point of view. It's also going to be better from the performance point of view. Every plugin, every interaction you have with a database will ultimately slow things down. We can cache some of that away, but every time we're doing some sort of interaction or some sort of action, we are going to slow down the site a bit. Also, when we're talking about security, one of the things that quite often comes off is DDoSing and this idea of a denial of service attack. Now, a lot of that's done and managed at hosting levels, but at a HTTP level, if we make sites that have bad query strings, that let's say WooCommerce sites with weird filters, easily sites can be taken offline with a well-targeted attack, just repeatedly hitting certain HTTP points. Now, if we spent the time to optimize those endpoints so that they actually were highly performant, that we were making sure we were cached the queries and other bits and pieces that make these endpoints just performant, that also helps us if the site comes under attack. It gives it one less thing to be worried about. Likewise, keeping everything up to date. That is the mantra of security. If you ask me what's the one thing you should do, apart from, you know, get rid of those admin users, keep everything up to date. But keeping everything up to date brings in all the performance benefits that people have been developing on. That continuous cycle that Scott was talking about. Well, that comes from us keeping things up to date, updating your plugins, updating WordPress. The latest version of WordPress comes with new performance improvements each time. This is another way of selling it in. it's really worth remembering that security is as much about this process and technology, and we can use security processes to bring these other things together. And we can often drive in changes either disguised as security, or we can bring security in disguised as these other changes. So we can bring them in, we can bring in security at the same time we're bringing in performance, and we can use performance to sell in to hide security, but we can also use performance to hide accessibility in the same way, because they just work so naturally well together.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think from a sales perspective, if you're really interested in security or you're really interested in performance, we'll talk about it. But if you're not interested, for me, it's a confidence thing of saying, we've got this, don't worry about it. Let's move on to the actual meat of what you need us to do. For us, what that looked like is the international standard 27001 security standard, which is basically just we follow best practices in everything that we do from a security perspective, and we've got this covered. If you want to talk about it more as a client, then great, let's delve into it, we can do that. But if you're not bothered, then we're good at this thing, we'll make sure it's baked in, we'll get on with it and do it. And I think that is probably a good summary of how all three of us are really treating security from a I guess an agency and a consultancy perspective, that as Tim's just said, it's baked into the way we do things, disguised in other ways sometimes. But it's really important that both performance, security, and accessibility are all hand in hand in being the norm, because it just builds for really good user experience, really good customer experience, and that's what we should all be here to do and achieve when it comes to the web and making the web better.
I think, Scott, as well, to the point of little and often maintaining a site, maintaining an application post-launch is just as important as what is set up security-wise and performance-wise to begin with. And I perhaps take for granted, I think most people do build launch websites and applications and go on to look after them on an ongoing basis. The advantage of doing that is you can keep those upgrades to both load speed, performance, and security there. Those checks little and often. Little and often means that then there are not these huge overheads if you were to just come back to the site after 6 months or a year, or the vulnerabilities that can arise in those times. We have a client within our agency who has been on the same WordPress build with us for almost 8 years now, and yes, they are sort of starting to work with us on planning a new headless implementation. However, because of the way that we've looked after and evolved that website, it still only has a handful of plugins. Touch wood, it has never had any security issues, but we've been continually keeping it up to date. And what we've not been afraid to do is actually just drop in and do a performance overview. There are, a lot of redundant, database cells that can be removed and cleaned up, old data, old pages that can all be tidied away to keep that, that application running smooth and running efficiently. So the fact that, a website, whilst it's gone through 2 or 3 themes over the course of those 8 years, it's just as sort of best practice today as any other platform, any other WordPress website that we would launch. And I think that's an important part that a lot of people overlook. Often, particularly with WordPress applications, are built, launched, put to one side, and then the problems can gather over time. And I think that's where this historical reputation of WordPress being vulnerable perhaps is derived, along with the, as Tim put it, the 100 plugins installed and developed by 100 different authors, some of which are very well built, well maintained, and others are pet projects that make their way onto the internet and then can be forgotten about. So little and often maintenance is, again, a mantra we have at StrategiQ.
I think that's a really good point that you should add. So much of WordPress can be summed up, problems with WordPress can be summed up with lack of TLC. To the point that I do site reviews for a living. That's what I go and look at people's sites and I give them recommendations on how to improve their security. And so often, one of the recommendations is, please just tidy up. Just go through, do those database query cleanups, remove those weird files that you've just randomly accumulated in WP content folder for no reason. That plugin that you installed 4 months ago that you've forgotten about, 2-year-old backup plugin that still has its backups just lying there. All of this, if you clear it up, this all adds to performance as well. So you can put this as part of a long-term maintenance package, and you can sell the maintenance packages. Look, we're keeping the site roaring and ready to go. Alongside this, we're doing this security stuff. I don't think you should, I said you can hide things, and it was said partly in a jest. I don't think you should ever hide the fact you're doing the security, because that opens you up to someone saying, well, I'm going with this company because they actually say they do the security. And you're like, well, I did all that, but we didn't need to tell you about it. So you do still have to let people know it's happening. But it has to be done as part of a wider package. If you just treat security in its own and isolate it away, then it becomes a line item, and that's terrifying. The second that security is a line item on a bill means it's one moment away from being sliced away. And then what are you going to do? Are you going to let your clients, not go without those security things that you're doing? Will you stop doing those maintenance? Will you just say, oh, well, that's it? Or would you carry on doing them behind the scenes? It puts you as an agency in a horrible dilemma as much as anything.
Actually, what you said before was really important, that we all like metrics. And that's a really important metric. I think WP Engine are really good at this, just periodically sending you an email that says, here are all the things we've stopped from happening. And actually, if you do that as a development department or a single developer or an agency or whatever you are, actually those metrics are more important than you think when it comes to, like you say, your line item getting slashed, or your budget getting slashed, or your job getting slashed, whatever it may be. Actually, just bringing those insights and metrics back into it. And a really quick nugget, like one of the best things I feel was added to WordPress over the last sort of number of years is that site health tool. Just going in on your dashboard and running the site health tool. I'm sure that had saved him a load of time on telling you basic things, but are you on the latest version of this? These things need to be looked at. That's actually a really useful tool at a really basic level, but the amount of people that don't run that is quite amazing to me as well.
These are all great points. With our last couple of minutes, I do want to shift us to a different topic. We would be remiss if we left this session without speaking about AI. Scott, you touched on it a little bit beforehand. But I'd love to hear from the full panel. How do you view this balance of security and performance that we have been talking about now with AI more in the mix?
I think there's a blend just to be had, like I said before, about the human versus the technology, and I think we really need to make sure that we're blending both. I'm not yet a fan of completely automated tools. I think they don't cover everything, and I think it's useful to have them there because they will cover and they will see things that from a security perspective or a performance perspective, or even to some degree a UX and an accessibility perspective, they'll notice things that you don't, because again, there's a standardized approach. So let's set up a standard. Let's make sure that the standard is ticked off and working. But what about that human element and making sure that we are creating that effective blend between the two? Don't run an automated tool and never look at or test the website for yourself, because the context of what you know, or the context of what an expert knows, the likes of Tim as a security consultant, is really important. We can't rely on just AI, not just yet anyway. I don't know whether we ever will be able to. I can't predict the future, but we certainly can't right now, and that would be my view on it.
I think it's worth saying that AI and automation, obviously they sort of go hand in hand, but we have lots of automated tools existing. We have lots of good security tools that are automated. AI and particularly large language models, your ChatGPTs of this world, that are taking the world by storm, and particularly taking VC funding by storm. So they have less impact than you might think for security. I've seen so many scare stories about how bad actors are going to use AI to take over millions of sites. It's like, yeah, these things. The thing about a large language model and its use, whatever you're going to do with it, this needs a lot of processing power. And yes, bad actors have access to lots of processing power in the form of hacked servers and sites, but that's quite distributed, and that doesn't really work with the current way that modeling works and bits. So, and also, these people are out to make money. and they can make plenty of money without needing to worry about doing fancy stuff with AI. So that then leads, well, are we going to use AI as a blue team, as defenders? And there is something to be said for, hey, can I just throw you my log files and you're going to tell me that this attack pattern occurred in this place? And that would be great. I'd love that. If I could just say, throw this file. But there are companies that have been telling me they can do this for the last 20 years, and they miss so much. There's a reason that we don't rely on the technology and we have security people, because we're really good at spotting patterns that computers can't yet. Now, will large language models be able to do that in the future? Sure, maybe. Tomorrow? No. Next year? I don't know, but I'm not, not quivering in my here thinking, oh no, I'm not going to have a job in a year's time, because these are still tools that hallucinate and, put funny pictures out. This isn't a technology that's totally scaring me out of a job, nor is it going to be something I'd ever want anybody to rely on until it can stop hallucinating. And that fact we even have that as a concept, that the tool can hallucinate a problem and a solution means that, it's not going to be the big thing.
It is early stages though, right, guys? And as I say, things are going to massively advance. I love your point, Tim, about AI fighting for the blue team as much as it can aid those that wish to cause harm or exploit websites. But from my perspective, my assumption is that it's just going to, in the short term, help speed up what people do against the same measures that they're taking at the moment to gain access, breach sites. We had a client of ours, not through any real fault of ours or their own, have a sort of social media account breach, and it took them 4 months to get it back. And the techniques and methods that have been used and are still being used, I think AI can help people speed that process up to look for vulnerabilities. But at the moment, it's still such early days that providing all the things we've spoken about so far in this panel are there and in place, and everyone keeps up to speed. Partners like WP Engine are going to continue to counter and advise on the measures that are needed. So I'm not worried. I'm sort of watching curiously as to how things advance. And I like to think that, the positives, the blue team angle, I'm going to steal that, Tim. That's a great term, AI fighting the blue team. I'd like to think we'll rise and counter any problems that we see, but do the basics well. It's my simple mantra with security based on everything that we've said so far.
All right. Still early days is the verdict, and we are out of time for this panel, so we'll have to revisit it next year. Thank you to all of our amazing panelists for joining, and thank you to our audience. We hope you enjoyed this session and enjoy the rest of Decode. Thank you.